The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. A quick message from me to say that this episode will be the last of the year, having Christmas Day off, and so should you. We'll be back on New Year's Day. I also wanted to say thanks for all your support. It's been an incredible year. Met some amazing people, learned huge amounts, got so many more ideas for podcasts. I honestly thought I'd struggle a bit in terms of topics, but the more you dig in, the more you discover that there's more avenues to explore. So I hope you've enjoyed it. We recently topped 1,000 downloads a week, which feels like a very fitting end to the year. So I'm very pleased about that. And I've got several plans to develop the podcast in 2020. So watch this space. In the meantime, just like to wish you a brilliant festive period full of booze, food and chocolate. And I'll see you in 2020. On with the show. And I'd just also like to say a big thank you to my fantastic social media manager, Rebecca Fitzgerald, and also to Ira Banerjee, who's also looking after my social media earlier in the year. Both of you are brilliant, and I couldn't have done this without you. So big thanks to you, and I hope you have a Merry Christmas. On today's show, I've got Joel Sherlock. Joel is the co-founder and chief revenue officer for Vitalis Extraction Technology. Vitalis are an engineering and manufacturing company producing industrial supercritical CO2 extraction systems for the cannabis industry. I knew I wouldn't be able to get that in one easy sentence. In case you're wondering what that is, Joel will explain exactly what Vitalis do. Extraction is really important for this industry and is a key component of most, if not a lot, of consumer and medicinal products. So it's great to get Joel on here to sort of explain the science and what it's all about. Welcome, Joel.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Pleasure. We've covered lots of different bits of the cannabis industry that's evolving. And a significant area that we haven't covered is extraction, which is really, really important in the whole kind of global industry. So I thought it'd be great to get you on to sort of give us a bit of a 101. But I guess before we do that, it's kind of customary to sort of, I guess, introduce yourself and give us a bit of your backstory and how you got into cannabis.
For sure. Yeah. And also we'll update our, that company bio and make it simpler. But
yeah, that would be helpful for podcast hosts like myself.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of technical info, and then we'll try and pare it down into the 101, as you said. But
yeah.
Because ultimately my background, I'm a finance guy who stumbled into this market, but we were extremely early on in the Canadian system. I came out of the real estate world. And, we owned some buildings, and, I had a guy approach me and he said, hey, $10 a square foot, I'll give you 12. And I thought that's terrible negotiating. Why? And, he had said, well, I have a license to grow cannabis and I have a business license and I've talked to the chief of police and it's a medical collective. And I laughed and ushered them out of my office. But, this was in 2011.
Wow.
And so, very early on, and that was kind of my first exposure to it. So subsequent conversation with our mayor, and he knew these gentlemen by name. And I thought, wow, so this is actually a real program. And then conversations with the bank and it was a very exploratory time for me. We ended up becoming the landlord. And then they introduced me to a friend who had another license. We built another building. And then our first equity investment was into a plant food company, then into a lighting company, and then I was hooked from there. So from a cultivation standpoint, I have a total of 0 green thumbs. But when it comes to brands, distribution, extraction, that was kind of where we focused. And so we were buyers and equipment financiers in the early days, but it became very problematic to us that, this science team had, this brand of machine, that science team had that brand of machine, but they couldn't share SOPs. They couldn't, share best practices. If we had a spare pump, it wouldn't work on both machines. So initially we had gone out to just standardize to one platform. And through that, we wanted some customization. Me being the finance guy, I wanted a deal. And then that was going to be the only machine we bought moving forward. And, a lot of the groups we came to learn we're not open to customization. They might not have been building their own equipment. They were buying parts, putting it together, and selling it. So customization became very problematic. So I initially had gone to some oil and gas engineers. One of them was a friend and past client of my real estate business. And he was working for a manufacturer who built oil and gas extraction equipment. And so, I sat down with him, had a beer, and, we were chatting about, could you build me 5 of these and how complicated would it be? And, he said, what kind of pressure? And I said, 4 or 5,000 PSI. And he laughed and said, oh, that's cute. And, I naive me, I just said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, Joel, we build stuff at half-ton capacity, 35,000 PSI. And if it doesn't work 24/7, like Shell, BP, Esso, we get fired.
Wow.
And so I thought, well, wow, that's the kind of expertise we're going to need in this market. So we ventured out, but at the time, it certainly didn't feel lucky. But looking back on it now, the owner of his manufacturing business didn't want to get into the cannabis market. So, took James and I some time to figure out, okay, well, let's start a manufacturing business, which is a whole much more capital than we were planning on. Mm-hmm. But, we brought in 1/3 partner on the operating side, who's Pete Patterson. So, and still to this day, it's just the 3 of us. Our technology is 6 patents on it, and we are the largest manufacturer in the world right now. And so ultimately, the easiest way to look at it is we power most of the industrial product manufacturers who are making cannabis products.
Wow.
Like, we make the equipment that's powering those labs.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Great ancillary play in some ways, in that you're kind of behind that and serving all of those customers. So there's tons to talk about here. If you wouldn't mind, we're going to go a bit sort of noddy on this. If you can give us a 101 on extraction. So maybe just let's start with, what exactly are you extracting from the cannabis plant, and what parts of the plant, etc.?
And yeah, so I wish there was a simple answer there. So, I mean, when you look at, there's 147, 150 cannabinoids that have, and more continue to get documented. Mm-hmm. And then there's 350, give or take, terpenes. So, there's about 500 active compounds in the plant. And of course, so many people talk about CBD, THC, and, traditionally in early markets, that's where a lot of the focus is. So from an extraction standpoint, you're taking a biomass. So you're taking grown material. Traditionally, you're going to grind it down to a coffee-like consistency.
So can I just double check? Is that both the stalks? Is that the leaves and the buds and everything?
So each of those pieces is going to have differing potencies of materials you're looking for.
Right.
So traditionally, like seed and stem, it's not going to be economically viable usually to extract that. There are some cases where people will, if they have downtime on their equipment or excess capacity or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. The flower is going to have the highest concentration of cannabinoids, THC, CBD, everything you may be looking for, but it's also traditionally the most expensive part of the plant. Mm-hmm. So, trim and sort of lower quality bud is traditionally put into the extraction lab. Mm. So when you look at extraction, then we're going to take that coffee-like consistency. You're gonna put a solvent over top.
Sorry, I'm gonna be really annoying and interject a few times.
Please.
So that's really interesting that you said that. So the premium buds don't necessarily go into the extraction process. Is that because they are kind of sold for themselves, if you like?
Well, yeah. Now, again, when you look at which market, and this is where, because we're the largest in the globe, so we have a very, global viewpoint on it, right? We have a very unique look over the market. So in Colombia, for instance, everything has to go to extraction right now in the regulations. So there, you'd have days where you're running just flower. You'd have days when you're running just trim. And you'd kind of batch those quality levels into one extraction.
Got it.
And then, going back to, so then you put a solvent over top, And now the leading solvents there's sort of three main categories: CO2, ethanol, and then there'd be, in the US markets and in more recreational areas, you'd have hydrocarbons like butane or propane.
Right.
We specialize in CO2. We also operate in cryoethanol. But, for us, ethanol is a very powerful solvent, and it's kind of a binary solvent, meaning it's on or off. And, that can work for some products and some methodologies, whereas CO2 is a very selectable solvent. So, the pressures and temperatures and all of those ranges and combinations, we can isolate or focus on different parts of the plant. So when you get into, lavender and extracting lavender oil, that single volatile is you get the best extraction technology to isolate that one volatile. Where you get into cannabis, and everyone was focused on THC and CBD. Well, now CBG, CBN, all of these other cannabinoids are becoming more and more valuable. And so you really need an extraction lab that has the flexibility to be able to pivot, because the only thing that's guaranteed in the cannabis market is change.
Well, 1,000%, I could agree with you on that. Right. This is so interesting. So to recap, you take whatever the biomass is and you put it in a solvent to extract what you want out of it effectively. Is it basically coming in an oil form mostly, or is it different types of things that you extract?
Yeah. So traditionally, your extraction step is going to get all the cannabinoids out, and traditionally some other pieces. So CBD and THC would usually come out together. You're going to pick up, the other cannabinoids you're looking for. If you're processing very cold, you can keep a lot of the terpenes and monoterpenes that are also very valuable. And, as we sort of build out that crude oil, if you will, that would be the first step of extraction. And then from that crude oil, then we're going to send it to the lab, and that's where they're going to post-process and formulate products.
Right. Okay, cool. So that's kind of what I thought. You do a kind of level 1 extraction to get the crude out, and then from there you have the material to sort of take out the specific things you need.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
And ultimately, if we were talking to one of our oil and gas engineers right now, they would say, you don't reach into the ground and pull out rubber. You reach in and you get a crude oil, and then it gets processed into jet fuel, diesel, all of these things. Now, in medical products, it's far more precision, GMP products and EU GMP standards mean that there's far more precision in the equipment. All the materials need to be fully tracked and traced. And then, when a sensor is reading 14 degrees or 7 degrees, how have we tested and validated that that's actually true and accurate? Because the precision in this and the consistency and replicability of the machine is super, super important for the consistency of output product.
Yes, I can imagine. Particularly in medical, a very high bar in that regard. Right. Okay. So we've got to the stage in our process where we've got some crude oil, as well as kind of extracting constituent parts. Is there then a kind of further purification step after that? And what are the things that you're purifying?
So there could be multiple, right? And again, it depends on the output you're looking for. You're going to hear a lot of talk, especially in your market, right? As the medical products evolve, right? There's things like Epidiolex, Cipidiolex. There's lots of talk around CBD isolates, which would be in Holland and Barrett and Boots, in a ton of different stores. And so isolated products are when there's multiple processing steps to remove everything other than the CBD or CBG, right? And that's where you're going to have like a 99.9% pure CBD.
Yeah.
Then there's going to be broad spectrum distillates, which would be less processing steps. And then you've got to isolate out the THC and remove it. So traditionally you're going to need more expensive or sophisticated equipment in order to keep the multitude of cannabinoids and pieces that you want, but isolate and remove the THC, which you don't want in some of those, novel food products, but you certainly would want them in a lot of the medical grade products.
Yes, yeah, of course. And are you also at this stage, or it sounds like there's quite a few stages, but are you also removing any contaminants and or any biomass?
Well, so in that main extraction step, we're going to remove, all of the fibers coming out. We're concentrating everything that's in the plant, THC, CBD, all the cannabinoids, and if we're extracting very cold, all of the terpenes and monoterpenes as well. But we're definitely removing all the fiber, all the stock, so the gross weight of that crude oil is significantly less than what you put in.
Yeah. And heavy metals and things like that, if there are such in the...
Yeah, in any kind of concentration, you're going to concentrate everything that's in the plant, right? So if low quality, it's the old adage of garbage in, garbage out.
Sure.
So if you're putting, biomass which has microbutanol in it, the molecular weight and composition of microbutanol is quite similar to THC. So you're absolutely going to concentrate both of those together.
Right.
There are extremely expensive machines which can separate those two things. In some markets that's allowed, in other markets that's not allowed. But traditionally it's just better to put quality biomass in.
Right. So there's no kind of purification necessarily. There are tools out there, but they're not necessarily economical.
Yeah, and they're extreme. Now we're getting into molecular chemistry at a very precise level. So also takes a very sophisticated operator, and traditionally a lot of solvent,
right?
Other solvents.
Yeah. Cool. So you've got to start with good quality.
Always
material. And I guess so. Thank you for explaining. That's really really useful overview. Maybe you can just sort of briefly explain why it is preferable to extract, or not necessarily preferable, but why there's such interest in extracting this versus using the whole plant.
Well, I guess it depends on the market again, right? In recreational markets in California, there's a whole bunch of, different consumption methods that consumers seem to prefer, right? Vape products, clean vape products in a legal market without any type of additive, can be a very safe and clean and simple, right? You can just carry that in your pocket. You can use it as you wish. When we get into medical markets, it's even more complex because physicians are far more comfortable with take two, call me in the morning, this gel cap, this tincture, this patch, whatever those dosage formulation pieces are that they're more comfortable with. Then, hey, buy some flour, roll it into a joint and smoke it, get enough, but it's not traditionally how they're used to putting out medicine. Definitely. And it's not traditionally how patients would want to consume it. And, anyone with some sort of respiratory illness may not want to smoke anything. They might want to take a soft gel or use a tincture or a topical. So all of those products require an extraction step.
Right. And so it's a really useful tool to manipulate the active compounds into a kind of preferable delivery method depending on the use case.
Mm-hmm. Now, once you concentrated it as well, and we've tested potencies, we can more easily control the dose to make sure that there's a consistent dose each time.
Right. Yeah, that too. And that makes a lot of sense as well. I guess it's a level of control, isn't it? Plants are inherently... They're subject to so many variables that the consistency is difficult. This makes a lot of sense. Cool. So you, at the beginning, highlighted that there's three main methods of extraction, and let's see if I can remember them. Hydrocarbon, butane, that sort of thing, ethanol, and CO2. And you guys mainly do supercritical CO2 and a bit of cryoethanol.
Yeah. So, our patents and our focus, we are the global leader in CO2. We also make cryoethanol machines. There are a number of, that's I don't want to say a simpler technology. It's a more prevalent technology because it's just, you're taking a solvent and you're putting it over a plant material. that can be very, very beneficial, and it certainly has a use. But again, it goes back to what kind of product are you making? And cannabis is a very new market, but it's agriculture, it's consumer products, it's contract manufacturing. I mean, so if we look at other industries, if we look at the perfume industry, for instance, when high-end roses are grown, harvested, and they're sent to a large CO2 extractor in Graz, Switzerland, and that that product goes into a Chanel No. 5 or something along those lines. Whereas mass production, they might buy a lower quality rose and they might extract it with ethanol, and then it goes into perfumes at more of a mass scale. Both of those can be very, very good businesses. It's just a matter of what kind of input are you putting in and what kind of output are you looking to take out. That's really going to determine the best extraction methodology.
Right. Okay, cool. That's really useful. It's sort of suiting your market with the best and cost efficient method. If it isn't a kind of huge and long answer, are you able to briefly say what some of the pros of each of the different methods are?
Well, yeah, no, absolutely, for sure. So CO2, definitely selectability. So, we could, in our CO2 equipment, which has very wide operating parameters, we could be running trim, low quality trim, hot, high pressure, and you get through it quickly. And then you could take the next run, you could be doing flower, and you could run that cold and get a broad spectrum. So, and everything in between.
Right.
Traditionally, CO2 is going to be very high capex. Like the equipment is very specialized. Right. It operates at a high pressure. If you're buying CO2 equipment, make sure that it's fully certified to pressure code. You're buying it from a manufacturer who has a material traceability for EU GMP. All of those pieces are extremely important. Now, once you own that machine, then your consumable is carbon dioxide, which is very, very inexpensive. So CO2 is traditionally high capex, but very low opex.
Right.
And ultimately gives you huge flexibility and customization no matter where the market goes. You've got, you're future-proofing your business with a CO2 extractor, in my opinion, but I may be a little biased.
It's a good long-term investment.
Absolutely. But, when you look at ethanol, for instance, it's a readily available solvent. You can put some biomass into your extractor, and it's going to be a much faster extraction with hot ethanol, and you're going to pick up everything: fats, waxes, chlorophyll, CBD, THC, and then you have to remove that solvent out of the process, and then you have to sort of separate or winterize or filter. With cryoethanol, which is very, very cold ethanol, we're going to pick up far less fats, waxes, and you get a broader spectrum. So that can be a very good extraction methodology as well. Mm-hmm. And we see a lot of large commercial processors almost putting both in side by side, so that, trim to topicals, we're going to run that down this line. Vaporizer cartridges or high-end medical tinctures, we're going to run that higher quality biomass through the CO2 machine. So there are pros and cons. The con on ethanol is, as one of my director of sales says, CO2 is expensive now and ethanol is expensive forever.
Yeah.
And, because you're going to be consuming that solvent forever, plus you're going to have a biomass that's now, so once your extraction waste is still going to have some solvent in it. So, it's not like you can throw that into, a compost pile or something. So in some markets, there's lots of taxation on ethanol. In other markets, there's, destruction protocols or hazardous waste pickup, or, you have to look at all of the variables depending on where you're located. Mm-hmm. And then hydrocarbon. So hydrocarbons are by nature a very, very powerful solvent. So, a quick blast of butane over product, will actually extract very cold and very quickly. And so that's why it gained a lot of traction in California and in a lot of United States markets. The only challenge we found with that is this solvent is so good that now you've got hydrocarbon bonded to the oil.
Right.
So then you've got to put it in a heat and vacuum process called purging, which is going to separate those two. Now, when it's done in a controlled environment, you can remove all or close to all of the residual solvents. However, it's not always done in controlled environments, unfortunately.
Right.
So having residual solvents is a risk. The flammability of ethanol, and especially butane, is going to require that you're putting those into, class 1 division 1 rooms. So basically explosion proof rooms with fire suppression. So dangers of working with those two solvents is much higher than, CO2, which is an inert gas.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's a really good rundown on the pros and cons there of those 3 methods. Is there another method? Is there cold pressing? Is that? That's a method, but is it necessarily industrial?
Yeah, so there's a lot of really interesting craft extraction methods. There's ice water hash. There's rosin presses, which just they use a ton of pressure and some heat, and you basically squeeze out all of the value. Now, but those, when I say craft, they can make some really amazing products, but traditionally you're not getting 90 or above % of the available cannabinoids out of that product. So, it would be like if you grew grapes for wine and you only pressed out half the juice, that would be very expensive wine. Yeah. And so there is a place for them. They are very interesting extraction methods. However, I don't know if you'll see them in the commercial market in a large way anytime soon.
Yeah, I had the great fortune to meet a guy called Frenchy Cannoli, known as the godfather of hash, in the summer, and he's known as an artisan hash maker. And the love and tenderness and care he puts into getting the resin out is amazing, but obviously wouldn't necessarily be able to scale that to industrial levels.
And you know what? I mean, I think there's going to be a very exciting place in the market for craft producers like that, right? I mean,
totally agree. Yeah.
There's $1,000 bottles of wine. There's $9 bottles of wine, and there's a market for both of those. The market for the higher end stuff is going to be much smaller, but of course the cost of goods to make those products are going to be much higher.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think that's why there's going to be domestic cultivation all around the world. It's not just going to be on the equator. I think there's going to be some interesting little craft things going on in each country.
Absolutely.
That's a really good rundown on extraction. I've certainly learned a lot from that chat. Can you tell us a bit more about what Vitalis do? So, you make these huge machines, but what do you guys offer consultancy services? I mean, this sounds like a very complicated type of setup for any kind of manufacturer to make.
It can be, and when we were buying equipment, it was an extreme point of frustration for me, where as the financier behind a lot of those, you'd ask, well, how much is the machine? Oh, it's $175,000. Oh, but then you need a pump, and that's $60,000, and then you need this, and then you need that, and it was always frustrating to me that they'd give you a price, but it didn't include all of the things you needed to make it work. Oh, you want the wheels with the car. Oh, you want the doors with the car, and so we took a different approach where we price our equipment with all the pieces you're going to need: warranty, consumables, on-site assistance, training. All of that stuff is included, and we've invested very heavily in having a robust ecosystem with in-country spare parts, overnight support, 24-hour customer service. All of those pieces, because downtime in this industry is very costly to the producer. But in medical markets, downtime could potentially affect a patient. And that's really where, I don't think that's acceptable.
No. And that's great that you take it to that level. What are you guys doing this inherently feels very kind of R&D friendly, or not friendly, but, it's a key part of what you do. What are you looking at in terms of innovation? Is it increasing yield, lower costs, sustainable solutions?
You know what? So we've made a commitment to not get into the processing industry, right? So we have R&D processing facilities and relationships, but we'd never make a competing facility to sit next to one of our customers, right? Because our ability to have a wide open relationship, conversation, we can power multiple competitors in a market, and in fact we do, and we can help them all with innovating technology that removes their bottlenecks, right? So our relationships and our customers are our greatest sources of inspiration and innovation for our R&D teams. And then as those bottlenecks emerge, we're really here to solve those with industrial technology.
Great. That's really good. And amazing. You must just get the most incredible view of the world market.
It's been very interesting, right? I mean, someone making an Epidiolex or Cipidiolex product, going down the clinical trials route with less than a 6% variance and, all of those things for a drug identification number. The bottlenecks and challenges they have are extremely different than someone in, California who's making 500,000 vape cartridges a month. But
yeah,
they also absolutely. I mean, I always encourage people getting into this market. There is no one who is processing or growing cannabis that you can't learn something from, no matter how different their business may be from yours. In the extraction world, right, grinding is always going to be a messy process. So if it can be in its own room with its own air handling system, then, that's just better for cleanliness, better for consistency and less contamination and all of those things. But even the simplest pieces, there's patterns that you're going to see.
Yeah. I think it's great advice. I think it's always learning, really. There is so much to learn. No one knows everything in any space, but particularly cannabis. And there's tons to learn from all different parts of the ecosystem. Cool. Well, thank you, Joel. I won't let you escape before I ask my customary last question, which is, what did your parents say when you told them you were starting a cannabis business?
So I've always been highly entrepreneurial, and Vitalis was my 9th startup when we put this together, and so
wow.
They certainly, I would say, skepticism and definitely lots of questions, but they were very interested in kind of the possibility and what we saw. Starting out, I eased them into it as well. We were a landlord to a legal facility. Then we got into a plant food business, and then we started a cannabis private equity fund, and I went in head first. So I would say, they were very welcome and open to it. And then when I started shutting down my other businesses and focusing 100% on this, I think the skepticism, I almost went through 2 waves of, are you sure about this? Yeah.
It's just a phase. He'll get over it.
Exactly. And I've never worked so hard in my life, but I've never had so much fun. I mean, it's been amazing to be at the forefront of the industry and really meet so many of these incredible people.
Yeah, that's great at the vanguard and doing some great stuff and really helping out a lot of businesses in the space. So well done, you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, appreciate it.
Cool. Well, thank you, Joel. It's been super helpful. I often do these shows based on what I want to find out more about. So at least you've got one person that has learned a lot today, but I'm sure my audience will love it too.
I love it. And reach out anytime if you got any questions. Happy to chat. We can talk extraction all day, every day.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Joel.
Take care.
Cheers.